Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Melanin Margin, the weekly chat show where conversations about race are never off the table. We're your hosts, Quaviondre Williams.
And Daquon Wilson.
So let's get into this week's conversation. What's hot on the table this week? In an article written by Meredith Nardino on USA Today, we learn about celebrity couples who never got married. One of the most popular couples who were never married was Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn. Hawn was previously married to Gus Trichononis from 1969 to 1976 and to Bill Hudson from 1976 to 1982 before she sparked her romance with Russell in 1983. The big screen icons never tied the knot, and Hawn thinks they're the better for it. I would have had I would have been long since divorced if I'd been married. Marriage is an interesting psychological thing. If you need to feel bound to someone, then it's important to be married, the First Wives Club actress said during a 2015 appearance on the UK's Loose Women. If you have independence and you have enough money and sense of independence and you like your independence, there's something psychological about not being married because it gives you the freedom to make decisions one way or the other. Hawn asserted that both she and Russell liked the choice of staying put in their relationship without the pressure of marriage. Russell, for his part, exchanged vows with Susan Hubley in 1979. The pair divorced after less than 5 years together, which impacted Russell's perspective in his romance with Hawn. Russell told Today magazine in November 2020 that, quote, "We said that if it was ever an issue, if the kids feel we need to do this, then we'll get married." And Hawn chimed in and said they didn't want us to get married. So this begs a very interesting question, Daquon. Do you think that marriage is necessary to have a loving relationship?
Not at all. In fact, I think that 9 times out of 10, people get married as a testament to how loving a relationship is. Nobody's going to be like, oh, I want to get married to fall in love with someone. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that sounds crazy, frankly. You date to fall in love with somebody. You go on consistent dates and you officiate a relationship with somebody to fall in love with someone, but you don't get married to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that anything that you have in a marriage, you had outside of the marriage. The only difference is you have official papers. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's absolutely not necessary for a loving relationship. However, it is something that's kind of just necessary in our society in the sense that with marriage comes, being able to like visit somebody in the hospital if they're very ill. It comes with tax benefits. It comes with all of these legal things that makes a marriage a marriage. So it's not really about love, it's more about legality.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think marriage is necessary to have a loving relationship in the slightest either. I think that a lot of people would like to believe that, and that's part of the problem with how we as a society view marriage as a whole. But first, let me say this. Marriage will not make a person love you. Marriage will not make a person remain faithful to you. Marriage will not make a person more considerate. They will not suddenly become romantic. They will not suddenly become more emotionally available. And last and not least, it will not make them stay with you. Marriage is not the cheat code of a relationship. It's not the real life hack that will force a person to be everything that they never were in the first place. So stop marrying people because you think that it will change them, because it will never happen. Any change you may perceive after marriage or marriages you've seen in your life is only happening because that person decided to change for themselves, not for their partners. Now back to the question. Um, there, are, there are several examples we've seen where people are totally in love and not married. Too many people have this notion that marriage is like more real than just being in love with someone. They believe that marriage is a stronger commitment somehow, and that if you aren't married, you aren't in love enough. While it is true that marriage can be one of the most traditional ways for people to display their love to the world, it is hardly the only way to show your partner that you love them. Let's not forget that at one point, Gay couples were not allowed to be legally married. Neither were interracial couples, neither were couples of trans identities, nor enslaved people before the Civil War. So if marriage is the litmus for a loving relationship, then that completely discounts the unions of people all across time who didn't fit into what was considered the mold of marriage of society at that time. Um, I think that the way we view marriage is outdated. There are some people who seek that kind of union in their life, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that there are too many relationship dynamics that exist, like thruples, polyamory, that challenge the notion of marriage because those relationships are just as fulfilling and sometimes more loving than couples in traditional marriages. Well, I don't think that we should throw away marriage. I do think that we need to retire the concept that marriage has to be this final destination for every relationship. But what about you, Daquon? I mean, do you think that society holds a higher value to marriage than simply just being in a loving relationship?
Oh, absolutely. I think going back to the idea of all of the like legal benefits, that is a factor in how higher they see marriage than just a relationship. Like, yeah, there are like the de facto marriages of like if you are together living in the same home for X amount of years, you're like legally married or technically married or whatever in
Uh-huh.
the eyes of the law. But it's one of these things where we have been taught that, that's like the path of life. It's you live your life up to a certain amount, you date, you then get engaged, you get married, happily ever after you die.
Hmm.
And it's like, as we spoke about with like happily ever afters, like that's not the case.
Hmm.
Like we've seen so many different marriages where they were married, but it wasn't a loving relationship at all. And that's
Hmm.
how so many marriages also end. And so I think that when it comes to how society views marriages, I think that because it's something that's on paper, that it's the legal definition of a relationship,
Hmm.
that is why it has this prescribed higher value. It's been something that has been gate kept from so many aspects, so many different people in our society, like you said before. So, as the notion of marriage is expanding, then people are now seeing, like, okay, marriage isn't, all that. There's more
Yeah.
than just wanting to ascribe to marriage. And so, I think that's also why you saw so much pushback when it came to things about interracial marriages or gay marriages or stuff like that, because that changed the legal definition of marriage. And if there are people who you prescribe as being lower in society having a privilege that you have being higher in society, that's going to quote unquote devalue that aspect of marriage. And so I think that it's one of these things that more and more as we move as a society, we're going to start valuing marriages less and less because we realize that, frankly, it's just paperwork.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's also a lot of pressure that comes with being married that people don't realize they put on couples. I remember the story this one couple told me that they got engaged, but they only did so because they felt pressured by their family and friends. They said that people kept asking them about what they were going to do next because they've been together for so long, and the guy's parents kept badgering him about proposing to his girlfriend, and he just did it because he thought that's what he should do, and she said yes because she thought that's what they should do together. They thought that it would stop their family and their friends from pressuring them, but then all the planning and venues and arrangements and invitations came, and the questions and pressures didn't let up at all. I mean, after they were engaged, both of their parents were asking when they were going to have kids, when they were going to buy a house together, and so on and so forth. And soon they decided to call off the engagement altogether. They said that even though they didn't get married, they still stayed in a relationship, and they were together for about 10 more years before they decided to get married in secret one day, just because they felt that that's what they wanted in their relationship at the time. And they said that if they were to got married back then, they were both sure that they would have been divorced by now. And that just blew my mind. Like, Daquan, I just want to ask you, do you think that the pressure of being married can sometimes actually do more harm to a couple than good?
Oh, absolutely. Because we have this kind of prescribed ideal marriage life. And so
Mm.
whenever you get married, people are going to expect that ideal life for you. They're going to expect, oh, you got married, the house, the kids, the 2.5 kids and a picket fence, dog, cat, maybe, who knows,
Yeah.
whatever. They're going to expect that idealized life for you after you get married. And that can cause a lot of pressure. And I also think that with marriage comes a lot of pressure in that kind of death do us part, or love for good and for the bad, or whatever the saying goes, because it puts a pressure on you that because you're married, you have to make this work. You
Mm-hmm.
have to make this work. And even getting to religion, like there's a lot of people who feel like di- getting divorced is against religion, because a marriage is a not only a legal union but a religious union, and so
Mm-hmm.
you are then disgracing or disrespecting your religious beliefs by getting divorced, and that can also add a pressure that now that you're married, now that you've gone through all of these different things with securing a venue, paying for a wedding, because weddings are so expensive.
Hella
Not only
expensive.
that, but court fees, marriage
Mm-hmm.
license fees, all of that stuff. You invested in this relationship. And so when you're that invested in a relationship, it's harder and harder to get out. And it's also harder and harder to kind of re-advance into society, because after you've been married for a while and after you get to a certain age, that dating pool gets smaller and smaller, and so many people are already married, or at
Mm-hmm.
this point they're not looking for marriage anymore, and it becomes this game of just like you feel like the world has moved past you and now you're back at stage one, and that's a lot of pressure for somebody. So they stay in the marriage. If they're unhappy, they're like, all right, we'll work through it, we'll work through it. But working through it doesn't really solve any of the issues that came from that pressure in the first place.
Exactly. I think that there is a lot of pressure that comes with being married. I think that so many people don't understand that, while it worked before for some people, and while it may work in some circles, not everybody is supposed to be married, and not every relationship can survive what comes with being in a marriage. There's a different, even though I don't believe that marriage changes people, I believe that the relationship status, the having to sign things together, having to be considered one unit or whatever, can put a lot of unnecessary pressure and strain on a relationship that is so used to freedom. Because there are some relationships that thrive in the freedom of just being together. And it's the idea that, I keep what I have, you keep what you have. And the idea of meshing together in such a legally binding way can sometimes be put a very, very hard weight and, like I said, a very hard strain on that couple. And some couples just can't survive that kind of commitment, or that kind of like I said, legal binding. So I think that while, for some people, it really is a great thing, and it really does help them, solidify, their relationship, or it feels like a destination for them. I don't feel that, we need to stop pressuring people into being in that kind of relationship, because if that person, I'll say this, if a person wants to be married to someone else, they will be. There's no need to tell them about it. There's no need to badger them about it. If somebody wants to be married, they will be married. If somebody doesn't, they won't. It doesn't really matter what you say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. It's one
Yeah.
of these things that's when you're dating, you are dating somebody because you want to be with them. That's
Mm-hmm.
like the whole freedom of dating. But when you're married, it's like you're forced to be with them. So if somebody wants something, they're going to go out and get it, but nobody wants to be forced to do something.
Exactly. And I wanted to ask you, Daquon, since we're on the topic, do you think you'd ever get married, Daquon? And do you have any ideas about your ceremony if it's yes?
Honestly, it's one of these things that I don't really plan anything around it. It's one of those things where if it happens, it happens, but I'm
Yeah.
not out here trying to, figure things out or come up with these
Hmm.
plans. But, it's one of these things that I think that the ideal ceremony, if I did, would have to be a reflection of that relationship. So
Ooh.
unless I'm in that relationship, there's not really a point in planning something or having this dream wedding in my mind.
Okay. Well, for me, I don't know. Surprisingly, I am totally open to the idea of being married one day. But only if I ended up with just one partner. If I end up having like two partners, we couldn't be legally married. But I would still love to have like a commitment ceremony with a ring exchange and a vow of our love made in front of our friends and family. I'm a firm believer in premarital slash couples counseling. So we would
Mhm.
absolutely have to be in that for at least a year before we decided to tie the knot or have the commitment ceremony in either situation. I actually do have an idea. I'd love to have a very intimate ceremony in either situation, preferably in a cabin with a fireplace because a bitch is romantic.
Cool.
Although for me, marriage isn't a deal breaker whatsoever. Like, if my partner or partners don't see a need for it, it wouldn't be the end of the world for me at the fuck all. Marriage is not a
Right.
goal for me whatsoever. It's a luxury that I can do, with or without, either way.